Okay, so and Ruben's coming now. So I'm saying hello, but we'll start the meeting in probably about 4 or 5 minutes. Hi, Ruben.
Good evening.
So, how are you? I'm trying to do some administrative things to get this going. John is not here tonight, so I'm doing double duty. So again, for those who are here, it's 7 o'clock, but we'll start the meeting in just a couple of minutes. Give people just a little extra time to arrive. And give me a little extra time I'm scrolling through a bunch of open tabs to get back to my email to make sure no one's emailing me because I'm having trouble logging in. So I apologize for that as well. Hi, Norman.
Hi, Laura. Long time no see.
I know. And as high tech as Zoom is, it's also high touch because we can actually see people. And it's been a really long time in some cases.
No, I just.
Hi, Norman. It's Donna. How are you?
Oh, hey, Donna. I'm great. I'm great.
Nice to see you.
And good. How are you doing?
Great. I've been trying to stay alive in the heat. Outside of that, everything's good.
Good.
Hello, Freddie.
Okay.
Hello. Good
Hi.
evening. Yes, it is. And it's going to be hot tomorrow.
And then it's going to rain.
Oh, if it would rain, I would just be so happy. That would
Well, you'll be able to dance in it probably Friday or Saturday.
You think it's going to really rain?
We got a hurricane below us coming up the coast. I'm hopeful they're telling the truth.
What a joy that would be.
And the humidity sort of makes me feel it's true. So yes.
Yeah, it makes my hair fuzzy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I should just call the meeting to order, and we can do some of the things we do up front in the meeting. So the first thing is I'm going to resume recording. And note that we're being, in effect, double recorded. We're being recorded on Zoom. We're also live streaming to YouTube. And for those who are first time at a UNNC committee meeting, we do have chat. We prefer, though, that, well, we more than prefer, our purpose in having the chat is not to just chat, but rather, if we have a motion, we'll post a motion. If you're having trouble raising your hand or we haven't noticed you, you can put a note into the chat that you would like to be called on. You can post information, but if you have a question to ask or a comment to make, please raise your hand, ideally the digital hand, which you can find under reactions. So I'm showing you under reactions, I just raised my hand and now I'm lowering my hand. And, but please do not use the chat as a means to make comment, an ongoing stream of comments about whatever we're doing tonight here. And we do append the chat to our minutes. So that said, oh, good. My fellow board member has arrived, so I can have a co-host. And then that said, I will really call a meeting to order. Hello, Teresa.
Hello, everyone.
And may I make you the co-host, please?
Yes, I'm only here till 8 o'clock, though.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Laura Myers, and I am the co-chair of UNNC's Planning and Zoning Committee. And I am sharing with you our agenda to go over it. I heard a beginning of a question. Okay, so you can repeat your question if, because I didn't hear the rest of it. Okay, so on the agenda, first thing I'd like to draw your attention to the item number 1. Well, first thing I'd like to ask everyone to be muted. And then I'd like to draw your attention to the determination to continue to hold meetings virtually. The Board of Neighborhood Commissioners and the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, with guidance from the city attorney, have established that the board has the authority to adopt AB 361 findings pursuant to a government code section 54953E, 1, B through C, to determine that due to the COVID-19 state of emergency, meeting in person would present imminent risk to the health or safety of attendees, and this meeting is being conducted virtually pursuant to that directive. And then next, welcome and call to order. Again, my name is Laura Myers. I am the co-chair of Planning and Zoning for UNNC, and I am a member of the board, and I live in the Region 1, Angeles Vista. And rather than going through all the introductions at this moment, we'll do that in a minute after I unshare the screen. We would like to review UNNC's standing rules for committee stakeholder voting participation. And essentially, our committees give advice to the elected governing board members. The only people who are appointed to our committees are its chairs and co-chairs. And otherwise, anyone who is an actual stakeholder to UNNC is also a member of the committee at the time of that committee meeting. So a stakeholder is a person who lives, works, worships, attends school, owns a business, or is otherwise a community interest stakeholder within our geography, within our borders. Community interest stakeholder is a person who may be a participant in an organization that has an actual bricks and mortar address within our borders. So that is who gets to participate. And on the agenda tonight, the primary agenda item is a presentation and discussion about case number CPC 2022 5432 ZC CPIOA, which we'll explain when we get there, but it's about proposed changes to the ordinance, which will expand some definitions and expand some of the neighborhoods that this will apply to. We will also, if there is any follow-up to previous cases, that is also on the agenda, as well as public comments, which I'm going to stop the share and say again hello to everyone. And if we could very quickly do quick introductions, starting with Teresa.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Masonette. I represent the West Adams Avenues on the board of the UNNC.
Okay. Donna,
Hi, I'm Donna Jones. I come from West Adams Avenues. I'm acting chair of our neighborhood association. Hello, everyone.
thank you. I will call the people with the phone numbers last since I don't know who you are. But next, Freddie.
I'm Freddie Braxton. I live in the avenues of West Adams for 16 years.
Thank you. Fabiola.
Good evening, Fabiola Insunza, City Planner with the Los Angeles Department of City Planning.
Thank you. Grace.
Hi, I'm Grace Yu. I'm a member of the board for UNNC and I reside in Region 1.
Thank you. Carlos.
I don't think he has.
Yes, good evening, everyone. This is Carlos Carrick, board member of UNNC in the West Adams.
Okay. Norman.
Hi, I'm Norman Gilmore. I'm a resident of Jefferson Park since 2003, and many years ago was an officer at UNNC and representative of Jefferson Park Region 1.
Thank you. Ruben.
Well, good evening. My name is Ruben Caldwell, a senior city planner with the Los Angeles City Planning Department. I'm here with Fabiola, and we're looking forward to the presentation and discussion.
Thank you. Sandra.
Good evening. My name is Sandra Paul. I am a resident of the Jefferson Park area, a previous board member as well for UNNC.
Thank you. I'm thinking that's Chris, but 323-356-3428 phone number.
That is correct. That's Chris Carlson.
Hi, Chris. And then, go ahead.
My name is Chris Carlson. I live in Western Heights since 33 years now. I'm the area rep for Area 4, which includes Western Heights and Kenny Heights on the UNNC board, and I'm co-chair on the oil subcommittee with Steve Peckman. Thank you.
Thank you. And call in user 1 if you'd like to introduce yourself. Or not. Okay. And if you do want to introduce yourself going forward, you are welcome to. So the first item on the agenda is public comments on any item that would be within the jurisdiction of UNNC's Planning and Zoning Committee, but which is not on tonight's agenda. So does anybody have any public comments? Please raise your hand if you have any public comments. Okay, seeing none, we are moving on to the actual agenda item. And so, Ruben and Fabiola, which of you or both of you would like hosting?
Fabiola has a very good presentation that I think she'd like to take you through
Great.
first. And I just would start off by saying that we certainly received your email and reviewed the comments. I would say that just keep in mind that the project that we bring forward is a very expedited, it's on a very expedited timeline. So we apologize if we were not able to have a very active outreach that you'd usually have with a project like this. But just keep in mind that we were working with a very tight timeline. And as I say, Fabiola will go into more detail on it. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to her at this time.
Okay. And Fabiola, I did make you a co-host.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Laura, especially for inviting us to tonight's meeting. We really appreciate the time to come and present upon this project. So I'm here to talk about the amendment to the South Los Angeles CPIO. And I want to start by giving you a brief background on the origin of this amendment. So the genesis of this project here was initiated back in December of 2021, when the City Council's Plum Committee instructed us to move forward with the work program that was divided into 2 phases. The first phase was set to take 12 months, and as Ruben just shared, a rather expedited timeline to quickly address some of the more pressing issues that were raised through this work program, which I'll get into. And the work program structure was to amend the South LA CPIO by applying the CPIO to new areas that are not currently covered by the CPIO, which includes an area surrounding the USC neighborhood, which we call, a lot of folks call the NSO area, referring to the Neighborhood Stabilization Ordinance, and then 2 expansion areas in both CD8 area, which is sort of the NANDAC's neighborhood council area, and then CD9's areas, following the boundaries of the Voices neighborhood council. The second part was to not only apply the South LA CPIO to these new areas, but also enhance some of those CPIO provisions by adding some unit replacement requirements and tenant protection, some of which are carried over by a new state law. The second phase, which is our longer term phase, would be to kind of move these ideas forward into a long-term project by amending the community plan for South Los Angeles, which would involve applying the new zoning code, and then also refining some of the community plans housing tools. But for tonight's meeting and for the purposes of the CPIO amendment, we are, in phase 1 focused on amending the South LA CPIO. And I should add that as part of these instructions by Plum, we were instructed to work directly with a task force, which was initiated by NANDAC and several community stakeholders in the area. And so we've been participating in monthly meetings with them to provide live updates and also receive live feedback on the project. So as part of that feedback and as part of a previous report we submitted to council, we summarized some of the top issues that were identified through this process. And above all, there was a lot of concern around affordable housing preservation and production, the need for tailored parking requirements and mobility options, the preservation of neighborhood character and design compatibility, and underlying that, a concern about accelerated demolitions, accelerated displacement, and then general questions and concerns around the process and definitions within the CPIO. So now moving on to the proposed amendments. There are 4 key components to this project, to these amendments. The first, as I described, is to apply the CPIO residential sub-areas to new neighborhoods within those identified boundaries, which I described earlier, but I will show you a map in a couple of slides. The second is, like I mentioned, enhancing the CPIO provisions by adding in a demolition delay for certain areas to not allow demolition permits for projects with existing structures more than 45 years old unless a new project has been approved. The third is to implement the Housing Crisis Act, which is also known as either SB 8 and SB 330. And I'll go into detail about what those provisions mean. And then last is to add the R1, R3, R1 variation zone to existing R1 zone parcels, which is a very small amount of parcels within our identified study area. So here is a map of the proposed change areas. And so you can see that it's bounded to the north by the 10 freeway and then to the east by the 110 freeway. Up here, the boundary is western, and then down here in the Voices Neighborhood Council area, the boundary is Normandy all the way down to Gage Avenue. And I should mention the CPIO's residential subareas are 3. The first is legacy single family residential subarea. Then there's a multifamily subarea and then a character residential subarea. So we've taken each of those subareas and applied them to new neighborhoods within this defined, very defined project area. And you can see these lighter gray polygons are areas where there's already either an existing overlay as part of the city, or the CPIO is already applied. So you can see it's almost an exercise of coloring in the map in these residential neighborhoods. And just to provide a little more detail on what applying these subareas really means, you can see at the top of the screen that currently where there isn't a CPIO subarea applied in this project area, development occurs what we call by right, meaning if they adhere to the code, they can go straight to the Department of Building and Safety and acquire their building permits. And the result is this sort of typology in buildings that we've seen cropping up in the neighborhood. However, when applying the CPIO subareas, you can see at the bottom of the screen, for example, the 2 subareas we're applying, the legacy single family on the left and the character residential on the right. There's some standards embedded within the CPIO that shape the building envelope and produce a different type of structure when the CPIO is applied. And just quickly on the R1 variation zone, as I mentioned, there's only really 2 small areas where we're applying this new zone. And the purpose of this zone is to encourage taller massing at the rear of the lot and then shorter massing at the front of the lot, which encourages a lower scale along the public right-of-way, which is another neighborhood, another design consideration that we're adding on top of the CPIO's application. And now moving on to the Housing Crisis Act of things. As I said, it's both SB 8 and SB 330, and it's a current law, state law, and it's currently being implemented here in LA. And there are 3 main components to it. The first is a no net loss provision, meaning a project can build less units than were there before, fewer units that were there before. So they can go from 2 units to 1, for example. They have to at least match the amount of units that were there before. Then there is a requirement to replace protected units, and there's a specific definition of what protected units mean. And that includes units that were within the last 5 years subject to, for instance, a recorded covenant, or deed restricted for a certain affordability level, an RSO unit, or were rented by a low or very low income household, or were in some form withdrawn from the rental market per the Ellis Act. And there's a look back period of about 5 to 10 years, depending on which of those categories the unit falls under. Then there's also occupant protections in the state law. There's the right to remain for tenants up until a certain point before construction begins. There's limited relocation benefits, and I should say that they are limited, and the city is looking at a study to think about how to expand those within the city. And that's not part of this amendment. And then there's the right to return to the project from which an occupant was removed. And the state law does have a sunset date. And so the purpose of putting these provisions into the CPIO is to, in essence, remove that sunset date. So these protections become a permanent feature of the geography which we're amending. And there's also some enhancements that we're adding on top of that. The enhancements are related to the replacement of those protected units. In the state law, there's a provision that says these protected units should be at least the same number of bedrooms of the unit they're replacing. And in the CPIO, the enhancement is also going to add that not only do they need to meet at least the same number of bedrooms, but they also need to at least meet the same residential floor area. And this is in direct response to concern that the units being replaced, in the past they may have the same number of bedrooms, but they were smaller units overall. And then the second provision that we're adding on top of what the state already requires is that when there is no income documentation to replace those protected units at the level of income they're supposed to be replaced by, the state's provisions default that number down to what the city's sort of breakdown of affordability levels overall are in the entire city of Los Angeles. But in the CPIO, we're proposing that the default, when there is no income level to prove what income level those units should be protected at, then we are proposing to default that level to the extremely low income level, with the idea that the AMI, in particular for that geography, is more aligned with the extremely low income level. So the other side of the Housing Crisis Act has to do with the ability of a jurisdiction to impose standards that could result in the loss of what we call like buildable area loss. So if you recall in a previous slide, I showed how applying a CPIO standard could shape the envelope of a building, making it maybe slightly smaller in some way because of some setback or step back standard. The state requires us to make up for that. And so the strategy with this amendment to make up for those losses, if you take the application of that, of the CPIO standards to the amount of parcels that we're applying it to, which is in the several thousands, there's a sizable amount of floor area that we need to make up for. And so that is occurring through some light touches along the TOD sub-areas in the CPIO. Some TOD sub-areas, well, I should say the TOD sub-area levels range from low to regional, and each one successively involves a higher floor area ratio for bonuses for, higher floor area ratios, I should say. And so we're moving some TOD lows to TOD mediums, some TOD mediums to TOD highs, some TOD mediums to regional, and then some TOD highs to regional. And
Fabiola, I'm going to interrupt for one moment. Can you explain for everyone what a TOD is? Sub-area is, please.
Yes, sure. The TOD sub-area in the CPIO is the transit-oriented development sub-area, and it's located along some of the major corridors in the plan. And the purpose of these sub-areas is to encourage, for instance, the TOD sub-areas is where the CPIO mixed income housing project bonuses live, where projects can access incentives and bonuses in exchange for providing affordable housing. So it's really where the CPIO's affordable housing program lives. And a developer can choose to use the CPIO's affordable housing program, or they might go through the state's density bonus program, or in some cases, the TOC program. So it's an option for a developer to choose when it comes to accessing some incentives and bonuses for their development. And I should add that in terms of this amendment, we're not proposing changes. Upgrading these TODs doesn't equate changing the underlying zone. These are just changes within the CPIO, so we're not changing zones here. And one change we are making to TOD regional in particular is that we're requiring those units, at least 30% of those that are, if a project is larger than 5 units, then 30% of those units should have 2 or more bedrooms to encourage family-sized housing along these major corridors. So in terms of next steps, I wanted to share with you the project timeline. We are in the middle of this public comment period. Mailers went out to folks living in the area and within a 500-foot radius on August 26th. We are scheduled for a public hearing on September 21st at 6 p.m. The public comment period will end October 12th at 5 p.m. And throughout these next couple of weeks, we're available to schedule any follow-up office hours to answer any questions. And of course, happy to answer any email inquiries and also questions today. After the public comment period ends, we'll take those comments and incorporate them into our recommendation report, which will be submitted to the City Planning Commission, which the meeting for that is tentatively scheduled for November 17th. Thereafter, the recommendation heads to the Plum Committee of the City Council and then the full City Council by the end of the year. So I'd like to encourage everyone to join the public hearing. Again, Wednesday, September 21st. We'll start with an information session, a presentation very similar to the one you heard tonight. And then we'll start the public hearing at 6:30 p.m. And the details for the Zoom meeting are here. I can also send, I think Laura might have the public hearing notice, but I can also follow up with email with more detail.
If you're able to post into the chat the Zoom link, and then people here can save the chat. I mean, I probably could do this. I'll do that for you. Don't worry about it. I just figured I can do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can. I just chatted the link to the public hearing notice.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And on the screen is my contact information should you have any follow-up questions after this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. I know that I have questions, but I'm wondering if people here in the audience also have questions. So please, again, we're sort of free form in that we have a meeting format and not a webinar format, but I would ask that you raise your hand and ask to be called on. And I see one hand up, and then not interrupt anybody who's already speaking. So Chris, go ahead. I know I see your hand is up.
Yes, my question is fundamentally, why is something this impactful on such an expedited timeline? It seems, particularly since a lot of this process seems to have started during COVID, where access to many city departments has been limited, if available at all. I'm just curious why the city is bringing such significant changes forward on such an expedited timeline, with the public being very challenged to come up to speed, understand, and have input.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in on and try to answer that question. Keep in mind that in earnest, this process has been being discussed probably for over 2 years. So basically, right after the CPIO became effective in late 2018, I think we had requests from the council office, CD8, in response to neighborhood concerns about demolitions in that USC area. So there had been this dialogue that was happening well over 2 years. And I would say that over the last year before the beginning of this year, so 2021, Fabiola and others had been working very actively with NANDAC, the neighborhood council. And then in 2022 was when we saw the motion adopted by Plum that really then called out the 2 phases. This first phase, the council office really wanted this to happen very quickly, within a year. We also had these key stakeholder groups that have formed, such as the USC Forward Coalition. And they too just spoke to the urgency of this, and so that's why we're moving it forward so quickly. And I just also want to just highlight that that we do have to be in compliance with the Housing Crisis Act, so SB 8, SB 330. And so that's also why you see these changes to the TOD areas that may seem dramatic.
Thank you. I think I'll just jump in a little bit here. UNNC approved and wrote a letter to the planning department in 2019, I believe it was. So it was when the first year of the implementation of the CPIO, identifying some real challenges with this whole program. You know, it starts with there's not enough staff. You know, an ordinance can't fix that problem. But the letter addressed, and I don't know who ultimately received it, but it addressed quite a few things. One is this idea of demolition before an approved project. And it's interesting that in what you're showing us is that now that won't happen, but doesn't the CPIO already say a demolition permit cannot be issued until a project has been approved and building permits have been, you know, construction permits have been issued? Doesn't it already say that?
You know, our assessment is that no, that it does not go that far in terms of demolition, the approval of demolition.
Well, I mean, the reason I ask is I see that you're applying it now, and I assume with that language is the whole CPIO and not just this new added geography.
Yeah, we should always clarify that these changes only impact what we call that CPIO protected unit area. So everything east of Western. Okay.
Okay.
And so any of these changes that you see in this ordinance, you know, they're really just applied to that CPIO protected area.
So you're saying that, because again, we've written a number of letters, we've requested more protection of existing affordable housing, including naturally occurring affordable housing, and that when incentives are granted based on a development providing, let's say, 5 new affordable units, that if they're tearing down 5 new affordable units, or in one case, 9 affordable for 5 new affordable, that language needs to be changed. And it sounds like you've changed it, but it won't be applied all across the board. And I guess if it won't be, why wouldn't it be, since you're in the ordinance?
So I should clarify that those replacement requirements that you just described are currently being implemented through the state law. So the state law already requires a certain level of replacement of units of a certain income level, what they call protected units. In this change for this specific area for the CPIO amendment, we're enhancing a certain portion of that aspect. But those protections are already implemented citywide, I should add.
Well, they're not actually, because in the South LA CPIO, but get up all the way up to Pico and St. Andrews. So it's not your new area. 9, there is a project where 9 existing units, and they're all naturally occurring affordable RSO, are being demolished, and only 5 are being built. Affordable, 45 units, but 5 affordable.
And
So,
I should add the state law came into effect January 1st of this year. And so if it's a project that was in the works prior to that, it might not have been subject to those provisions. So it's a brand new thing that we're implementing.
Okay, so is there a reason why that language can't be implemented in the entire 106-page existing CPIO ordinance rather than the new 21-page revised section?
You know, it could, but once again, just speaking to the scope of the 2 phases, you can think of this first phase as a pilot. And then the second phase is when we apply the new zoning and perhaps these additional provisions to the entire CPIO, to the entire plan area. So it could, but you know, as I say, this is more of a pilot. And then also just keep in mind that, you know, we have noticed pursuant to our code 1232, section 1232, for just those affected properties and that protected CPIO protected unit area. So it would be a larger notification as well.
Okay. So it won't be just the Laura show. Does anybody else have any questions at this point? And Chris, your hand is still up. I don't know if you may. Teresa.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Fabiola, for your presentation, and welcome, Ruben. I do have a question regarding the preservation of our tree canopy. Occasionally when these buildings are demolished, tree removals take place. And not just in UNNC, but throughout the city, we are trying to preserve and grow our tree canopy. And I don't see any mention of that in your amendment.
Yeah, although we do not have a regulation relative to street canopy, we do have regulations that deal with the setback and the front setback in particular. So, you know, we're basically have a provision that talks about a prevailing front yard setback. So you'd always have that, you know, basically that mature street tree canopy intact with as a new development came in. And in the rear yard as well, there are some, you see that we by right development is really just this you know, this elongated box that just can be built all the way to the you know, to the setback lines, and we're working to refine that so that you have more, you know, what would be the backyard of these structures retained.
And could that include restrictions on tree removals?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say that the city has strong provisions on tree removals through urban forestry, and we could certainly provide that contact information if you'd like to.
Well, thank you very much, Ruben. Actually, I'm the liaison to UFD, and I sit, even though I'm not approved yet, I do sit on CFAC, so I'm aware of that. But what I'm asking is that could there be stricter, and actually what I'm waiting for, and maybe you can take a look at this while we're talking, the Plum Committee and the City Council regarding file number 15-049-S2, and we're waiting right now for Connie Palladini Tipton to give us a report back. The city is trying to maximize all efforts to preserve and grow our tree canopy. So what I'm asking is, can there be some language that either restricts or certainly says that before approval is made, that evaluation of the trees on the property have to be evaluated previous to any removals?
I mean, we can certainly look into it, and if you would like to provide written comment and some further direction, that would be very helpful for us, and we'll look into it. I think that's probably, you know, all we can state at this point.
Okay, I guess I'll have to take that. Thank you very much, Ruben and Fabiola.
Donna.
Sorry. Hi, Ruben. I'm Donna Jones from West Adams Avenues. I remember you when you worked with our group years back. We are concerned, as Teresa says, South LA is in a dire position regarding our green spaces and our tree canopy. So it is a big deal to neighborhood council in our area and our neighborhood associations to preserve what trees we have and to ensure that large trees are placed on any planned projects within this area. We've lost so much. You compare it to other areas, and I don't have the numbers, but I'm sure you know or would think if you have any history here in the area, and I think you do, we have a problem, and it definitely has to be addressed. So I have the same comment. I think it's a big deal, and I want to make sure that we let you and Fabiola know that it's something we feel is super important and should be included, because our tree canopy has lost the fight over the years. All along Crenshaw, we've had to fight for what they're dealing with. It's the area where trees go to die, because they put in 50, they give us 50 little tiny trees when they do projects and no one ever takes care of them. So that's just the comment I needed to make sure that you understood that it is a big deal.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go back to, I should have my video on when I do this. So Ruben, I know you were involved. I don't think, Fabiola, that you were involved when, again, the CPIOs were written and approved back in 2017 and 2018. So one of our biggest issues for the character residential overlay CPIO, and my understanding is that NANDC has also addressed this, is the what is an eligible historic property. So the City Planning Commission back in the day very specifically adopted the community's position that Survey LA was woefully inadequate, immediately out of date, had skipped entire blocks, just missed them, in the area that you're talking about, missed the farmhouses that date to the 1880s. There's about a dozen of them, missed them completely. And the Planning Commission adopted language that added to the city planning staff's recommendation. So the recommendation had been that an eligible property was identified by Survey LA, and they added the language or other historic resources survey. And City Council adopted that language. Unfortunately, when the ordinance went to the city attorney or back to staff for final ordinance language, you added some more language. Specifically, you added the language or other historical resource survey, and then, quote, completed by a person meeting the Secretary of Interior's professional qualification standards for historic preservation and accepted as complete by the director in consultation with the Office of Historical Resources, OHR. You added that language. And so between then and now, OHR has rejected the use of almost all the CRA surveys. It's rejected the use of city planning's own South LA Historic Resource Survey with something like 7,400 properties listed. It rejected a community-based attempt to do an update by demanding that they only hire one of the 6 firms on some private list that OHR has of what is an acceptable firm. So only a firm, not a person. And I mean, in other words, barriers at every step of the way. NANDC asked that you use the language that essentially defines anything built more than 60 years, I think was what they were asking, not the 45 years, but 60 years ago would be automatically deemed eligible and would require a new assessment. But it's been our biggest problem. So we have the Angeles Vista Character Residential Overlay. Survey LA only covered 1/3 of the land. I mean, in other words, of what's in the overlay district, only 1/3 of it is in Survey LA, but the vast majority of it was surveyed by the planning department by was the Myra Frank firm, then Jones and Stokes, and now is whatever the international, whatever it is, but it's the same people. So it's on the list, the firm's on the list, but you won't use survey. How can we fix this? Because it's been our biggest problem. And it's resulted in councilmen having to nominate properties, a huge amount of negotiation. It's a quick fix to remove the barrier and go back to the original language. Or, well, I would just say the planning department has not attempted to get funding to do the whole resurvey. So the new areas that you are including are not surveyed. So nothing's eligible, or very few items are eligible, frankly, in those areas, which is, I believe, what NANDC had already told you. So are we going to try and fix this?
Well, I mean, as you know, the ordinance, the final ordinance is prepared by the city attorney, and, and they certainly will revise and clarify as needed. So, you know, I certainly, it's not really my position to say, yes, we can change this. All I can say is that, you know, perhaps in phase two, you know, as we look at the full ordinance, you know, maybe there's an opportunity to clarify further. But that's really, you know, that's really as far as I can go today on this. We're not amending any that definition at all. If anything, we're really trying to apply these residential sub areas to these neighborhoods so that we activate that eligible historic resource. That threshold for CEQA, if you know, that provision in the CPIO. So I mean, I think it's getting us. It's moving. It's you know, it's a little bit better than what we have currently, you know, in terms of just the underlying zoning applying.
Yeah. Well, if the barrier is not removed, meaning the barrier to what is an eligible resource, then I mean, in other words, it's sort of a catch-22, because on the policy level, I know that what you're trying to do is protect the character of our neighborhoods on a policy level. But on the side of planning that's on the, you know, case processing side, they're just refusing to use any of the other surveys, and OHR is not cleaning up that path. So I recognize you can't put in an ordinance, OHR needs to be better, or OHR needs to open up the doors, and you can't put that in an ordinance. But then again, that language landed in the ordinance somehow without the city council having initiated it. They did vote for the ordinance, but as Andrew Westall, who used to be Council District 10's sort of senior planner and, you know, deputy director, said, if we argue about it too much, it's going to take months to get this ordinance out of council, which is sort of the same thing you're telling us now too, which, you know, well, wait. But it's been 4 years already, and we've lost historic homes because of it. So anyway, does anybody, again, so we UNNC will resend that letter and maybe more, but other questions from anybody or comments? Because we have a lot of people here. Anybody have some questions? Okay. No, nothing further for Fabiola or for Ruben? Okay, I see a few things in the chat, but they're still on prior topics. I see a hand, Chris.
Yeah, you mentioned some changes or amendment to relocation costs, and how is that in addition or beyond what is already laid out on the under the RSO ordinance for the city, or is that in relation to properties that are not RSO? Could you explain what you were referring to?
Sure, happy to. The relocation benefits that I talked about were the ones that are now currently being implemented by the city through the state law through SB 8. And so those are relocation benefits that were given by the state law for residential projects for protected units. The RSO ordinance has its own relocation benefits procedures, and this is a separate process. I hope that answered the question.
Chris, did that answer your question?
Yeah. So it's these location benefits are for properties that are not currently under RSO, but are still a protected class, but not under the RSO ordinance. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
You know, I should maybe say that there could be some overlap. I'm not as familiar with the RSO relocation benefits procedures and how they're kind of overlapping with the state law, but I will say that a protected unit under the state law, an RSO unit would be considered a protected unit. So there is some overlap, and I'm sorry I don't have further detail, but I'm happy to follow up once I learn more about those overlaps.
Okay, okay. And I would suggest that anyone who is focused on preservation of affordable housing be very familiar with our city RSO ordinances, because a sizable percentage of our affordable units are under our RSO ordinance. So, you know, as part of the larger picture, that's an important documents and procedures to be knowledgeable of. Thank you.
Fabiola, can you repost the slide with the boundaries, but maybe also, because I think on the TOD density increase, that part of that is at Jefferson and Western, but could you show that one slide? I don't know if you can get back to that easily. So, and this is a slide with the boundaries of the expanded area, correct?
Yes,
Because
I'm happy to. Actually, we have a story map on our website where you can interact with the map itself. I'll drop that link on here. If you click on the map tab on this link, you should be able to zoom into the street you're asking about.
Right. So, right. Well, I have a request that we repost the boundaries. Oh, well, or it's fine. So, but on again, on Western and Jefferson, it looks like you're changing the TOD to a slightly higher density, right? It's up the southeast corner. Or southeast corner of the intersection, the northwest corner of your expanded area, I think.
Yeah, so we're doing east of Western above Jefferson, and then east and west of Western below Jefferson.
Got it. So these are adjacent to single family neighborhoods. So I think, and Ruben, you'll maybe remember, wasn't that the subject of a lot of long discussions about the kind of disconnect of the little one-story bungalow neighborhoods with the high density at that intersection? And yet, I mean, we've already had this discussion once. So what will be the impact? Because I understand we have to balance the loss of potential units in one place with we have to balance that and create potential units in another place. But I think that particular intersection had a lot of conversation back in 2017. Ruben, can you remind me, does this ring a bell?
You know, all I would say is that we're going from TOD low to TOD medium. And in terms of the FAR, the square footage increase, you know, you're going from really a 2-to-1 to 3-to-1. And if it's an affordable housing project, it's really the same. It's the same FAR. Keep in mind that there would always be transitional height that's applied. That does not change. That's in effect now, and it would remain in effect. And then, you know, we do just, you know, keep in mind that, you know, these are TOD designated areas. If they were designated as corridor sub areas, so everything in red, if you will, in the TOD, I'm sorry, in the CPIO, you know, those are the base FAR is at 1.5 to 1, but you know, you could utilize any of the programs that we have available, you know, the local JJJ program, TOC, or density bonus, and get to a 3-to-1. So it's really just very consistent with, you know, the corridor approach.
So, but it will potentially increase, not necessarily really, but potentially increase the density at that intersection. And I mean, yeah. I mean, you'd have to be losing a grocery store to get that, I will say. I mean, you know, we're talking about a food for less on one of those, on the corner that has the biggest chunk of land is a big parking lot in the food for less. And that would be, again, southeast corner. And then the northwest corner is like chicken and a eyesore thrift shop that we talk about at UNNC quite a bit, actually. But the only large lot is the southeast. So what would you, I mean, and what would you anticipate the actual density increase would be, not the FAR, but the unit increase when you go from TOD low to TOD medium?
You know, I really would say that it's really not about the density. It's really more about the FAR, the square footage. You know, and those two sub areas are very, very close. You know, they're 0.5, you know, or 3 to 1 is the max.
All right. Anything else from anyone else? It is 8 o'clock. I know our meetings usually go 2 hours, but not usually one item for 2 hours. So, or Fabiola or Ruben, do you have questions for us at all? Since this is a conversation, not a webinar. So if you have anything you'd want to ask us, that's fine too.
No, we're just really happy to be here, and thank you for this feedback. And you know, we look forward to seeing you at the public hearing information session. You know, and I do see, you know, you do have a couple of hands. So I don't know if there are other questions.
Oh, now I'm seeing, I'm scrolling up.
Yes,
Teresa, go ahead.
Yes,
I
thank
know
you,
your meeting's
Laura.
through.
And thank you, Ruben, for pointing that out. I didn't want to jump in on Laura. You just mentioned density, and maybe Donna is going to talk about this too. This is just not specifically for this amendment, but just in general. When we increase density and we do not amend all of the infrastructure infrastructure that is impacted by that, increasing the sewer lines, increasing water infrastructure, all of these things, when we increase density, it does have a trickle down effect on other quality of life elements for the community. So I just don't know if you guys take that in consideration when you're making these planning recommendations.
You know, absolutely, and just keep in mind that, you know, a complete CEQA EIR was prepared for the plan update, and we are utilizing that same certified EIR where all of those utilities and services were analyzed and the impacts of this growth. So yes, that was certainly taken into account.
Great, thank you.
Donna.
I think we're in a flex alert right now. And the state is throwing, I mean, right now, 15 days with no water for some communities because of problems with the lack of resources, electricity and water. How is this impact overall? Because I know it's not coming directly from your office or you guys. Who's taking that into consideration when the state of California is supposedly going dry and the lack of electricity? They want us to turn things off for so many hours. And you guys live here just like we do. But who's taking that into consideration? That's just a question I have.
I mean, it's a big,
Yeah,
it's a big question, but I think we're all aware that it's, you know, it's being addressed at all levels, you know, state, federal, and local. So, you know, I'd rather than try to unpack it really, I would just say, you know, yeah, I would say everyone is very focused on this at this time.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Chris again.
So to that point, in terms of things being addressed, is there anything in this ordinance that requires, say, new multi-unit construction to be recycling, you know, building in gray water within, you know, while they're getting these bonuses and stuff, that they also have to have, say, generate a certain percentage of the building's power from solar on the roof, being able to as part of the build construction, to actually have gray water recycling as into these buildings? Are these things actually the kinds of things that are being put into place so we are addressing these things? Or is it just a general, everyone's watching and worried and not doing anything concrete at the level that we're actually doing the impacts, AKA building and densifying? Can you help me there?
Yeah, sure. There are numerous agencies that implement those requirements locally and at the state as well. We have several ordinances that have been in place for many years. Green building ordinance, all of these things. We now have electrification, electric charging for cars required in buildings. So yeah, I mean, it's really, I'm not trying to gloss over this, but I will say that it is multi-agency related, and perhaps it's a follow-up discussion with LADWP or street services. All of these departments really come into play. So,
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I think we can close this piece of the session. I know we still have one more item on the agenda, which is the old business. But I'd like to close this section and thank both Ruben and Fabiola very much for coming out in the evening, and perhaps not as usual, being in a conversation kind of meeting where it's more than a 1-minute comment from people. So, but I hope that's useful for you. I do think UNNC will resubmit its long ago comments, even though you're saying we're not doing that part of the ordinance. But I think we'll probably, we voted to go ahead and do this, to ask that you think about some tweaks in other sections of the ordinance, because again, it hasn't been able to be implemented very well. There's been staffing issues and education issues and too many demolitions without resultant projects in the CPIO areas, even though that was not supposed to happen. And Ruben, you'll like this, there's not supposed to be there's not supposed to be new auto related uses in most of the commercial corridors, but it turns out that the implementation staff defines autos perhaps differently than we did when we were writing that. So we'll be making the comments, and hopefully you'll be able possibly to open the doors to some tweaking of the whole ordinance at the same time. But I would say I don't want to wait for the 20-30 year plan to fix the problems. That me personally, I would like to see if we could more easily fix it. Okay, and with that, the last item on the agenda is next and last item on the agenda is follow up, if any, to previous cases, ENS and or old business. If anyone has any follow up, old business, just please raise your hand and let us know. Okay. So I will remind all that we have some pending hearings or hearing results. There was the hearing on the oil drilling, and UNNC has submitted what we needed to do and spoke. And the 1848 Gramercy case will be back at the Planning Commission on October 27th. And John, of course, is the lead on that, and he will be back in about a week. And last but not least, UNNC's Planning 101, an updated version, will be one of the sessions at the Congress of Neighborhoods. And if you're interested in that, please, email me. And we may have a practice session. John and I may have a practice session going through the presentation. So my email I'll put in the chat, but it's laura.myers@unnc.org. So I can send you information about the Congress, or I can invite you to our practice session. Email me. And that's the updates and old business, et cetera, from my end. Does anybody else have any other updates? I mean, Teresa, you did tell us that the tree portion, the tree, I forget the name of that ordinance exactly, but we're waiting for Connie to do a report from the planning department.
Yes, I'm going to be talking to Bellem and CDA, the deputy legislative person, but she's also waiting. It was supposed to be a 30-day report back, but it's been delayed. The city forest officer, they're getting it together. So we're going to find out tomorrow when we can expect it.
Okay, good. And last, this committee meeting that usually is first and third Wednesday nights, but we're not holding it on the third Wednesday of September because it's the exact same time as Fabiola and Ruben's workshop and hearing on this. So we will not be meeting on the third Wednesday of September. We will be back on Wednesday, October 5. And with that, if there are no other comments, if you'd like to save the chat, and you've never done this before, if you take your cursor and go down to the bottom of your screen and you see the word chat and click on it, and then you'll see 3 little dots. Click on that where it says more. You can click on save chat and you'll get the links that were in this meeting. Okay, thank you everyone. And with that, we will end the meeting.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
everybody.